the fence expert. Who's that guy in that orange shirt? Who must be the fence expert? It's almost time to talk about the fences. It's time to discuss operations and expenses. It's time, it's really time to elevate small businesses. It's time for Joe to drop his knowledge, it's relentless. This rhyme of mine is getting a bit ridiculous. So here we go, we're live with Joe. Enjoy the show.
What is up, Fence fam? So good to be back with you guys, virtually, as it were. I'm so glad you guys took your time out of your Saturday to come join us. If you're watching live, you might be listening to this on the podcast. And if you are, welcome. You are listening to a live to recording, or recorded live version of a live Q&A we host most every Saturday from 10 to 11-ish Central. Just depends on where the conversation takes us. If you're listening, but you'd like to participate live, just search Joe Everest really on any of the social platforms, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram now. So wherever you like to consume video content, there's a good chance we're there. Like I said, most every Saturday. Appreciate you guys listening. The team tells me it makes a big difference if you would share it out with your people, but also leave us a review. Let us know what you think. So if you guys read the title, you know exactly who today's guest is. Before we bring Andrew up, because listen, when Andrew comes up, we are going to hit the ground running. We already talked for a few minutes before the show, and we basically had a full show before the show. So, and I can only imagine where the conversation is going to take us. Before we get to that, huge shout out, huge thank you to Expert Professional Wood Care Products. Their line of fin stains make a difference in my business. We were vendors before they were sponsors. We love their products, which is why they sponsor the show. We reached out and asked if they would like to help support the show, help bring it out to more people. And of course, the good people over there, Caleb, Ashley, and the team, couldn't say yes fast enough. So thank you guys. If you guys install wood fences and you're looking for a great way to add top line revenue, to add a easy upgrade conversation, you should check out Expert Professional Wood Care Products. With that being said, let's bring up Andrew and hit the ground running. Andrew, how are you?
Wonderful, Joe. How are you, sir?
Very good, very good. Like I said, I believe we had like almost a full interview before the interview.
We sure did.
I appreciate you making time on a Saturday morning. I know this time is sacred in a lot of ways, so I appreciate you making time.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Guys, to give you a brief outline, so I'm trying something new. We talked about this beforehand. I'm actually writing down a brief outline of what we should talk about. Now, it's fun to see where the conversation goes, but also it's good to kind of keep us on the right path, or else, you never know where the conversation goes. And next thing you know, we're talking about aliens in Antarctica or something to that effect. So it's a brief roadmap, and we might not get to the end, but the first and foremost, because I think it's really important to talk about, is key employee retention. Now, and before we get started, we'll define key employees, and then maybe we just talk about employee retention, maybe in general. The second stop on our journey is going to be a conversation about keeping your assets separate from your operating company, if it makes sense, why it might make sense, some potential benefits, who should begin to think about it, that sort of thing. And then the last stop on our journey is business organization. So like legal ways of organizing your company, and maybe the reasons you might think about reorganizing, or maybe when to think about reorganizing. Does that sound about right?
Sounds beautiful.
Beautiful. Before we get started, let's say hello to a few people. Front Rock Fences. Good morning, Joe. Thanks for showing me the shop and the hospitality. Very welcome. So I was having a meeting, and in my office is a screen with the security cameras, just so I can kind of keep an eye on everything, see who's where, and if anybody needs help. Anyway, we're having this meeting. I glance up and I see a beautifully wrapped truck sitting in the parking lot. I thought, oh, that truck is sharp. Which, okay, mission accomplished on the wrap. And then I looked at it like, Front Rock Fences. I know that guy. What in the world? So I ran up front and we took a tour of the facility. Appreciate you stopping by. So Andrew, this gentleman is driving from Florida up into Canada. So he's literally taking a tour of the country.
Jeez.
It's a drive. It is a drive. I think if I remember right, I think he's still on the journey. I think he still had several more days to go. So appreciate you stopping in, and it's always good to see you. Thank you for your support. Roger Bencourt's here with us. What's up, Roger? Hello, Joe and the rest of the Fence fam. And hello, Andrew. There we go. Cannon Johnson, we know this guy, tuned in. Thank you, Cannon, for dropping by.
Oh, Cannon.
Roger says, let's not forget those affirmations. That's right. If you're watching it and you think this content is worthwhile, give it a like, or better yet, if you're watching Facebook, hold the like button down and just choose any of those. It could be the heart, or it could be the angry face. It doesn't really matter. As long as you pick one of those, it does good things. Remember to share it out. That way, hopefully we'll spread the good word to more people in your circle. Oh no, Sarah Orlandi. Sarah, what are you doing here? An outline? I've never been proud. So this is my sister, my youngest sister, who also helps me in the business. And so she's like rubbing off on me. So she has lists organized, her list of lists, I believe. Like it's all very organized.
I like it.
And I drive her crazy. She's like, well, what is the do we have an agenda for the meeting? The agenda is we're having a meeting, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, yes, Sarah. A list. Now it's a 3-point list, but a start is a start. Craig Eubanks. What is up, Craig? What's going on, fellas?
Craig, how are you, sir?
I like so Craig had put some actually it looks like the logo in his Facebook profile. He dropped them on socials. Talk about somebody doing good stuff. Keep an eye on Craig. Mm-hmm. Robert Evers, what's up, Robert? Good morning from Dublin, North Carolina. A fellow, what do you call somebody from North Carolina? North Carolina? Nope, that doesn't sound right.
North Carolina?
North Carolina. Yeah, let's settle on that.
That's
You
not-
bet.
okay.
What's up in the Carolinas, Robert? How are you? Yeah. So something that if you watch the show, you know, we went back to my hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina, and saw what's going on there. Which here's a fun fact. Well, I should have gotten this right beforehand. So there used to be a mall. So I lived in a small town called Cary, right outside Raleigh. There. One of the gaming companies, so it's like Blizzard or one of those, bought the mall, tore it down, and is building their world headquarters right there.
Oh,
So
wow.
we drove by there, and the mall was gone. You know, as a kid, you have like these foundational memories.
Mm-hmm.
One of mine was me and my buddies jumping on our bikes, and now this was okay. I was gonna say recent. Now I'm 40, so it's not that recent, I guess. But the mall was new. Like I remember when they were logging it, me and my dad went and flew kites because it's a big open field. So I mean, it had to be maybe 30-ish years old. Anyway, me and the buddies would jump on our BMX bikes, ride around, go spend money at the arcade or get candy at the whatever the candy shop is. So to drive by that and see it bulldoze down, not a great day.
That's tough.
It is. It was a rough day. Front Rock Fences says he just crossed the border into Canada. I'm glad they let you back. I really am. All right. So Mark, you want to drop the link for you just and Mark's always 2 steps ahead. Good morning, Facebook user. Sarah says you call them a Tar Heel if they know what's good for them. Fair point. Yeah, and then Robert agrees. Tar Heel all the way. Okay, so we're agreed on that. We can proceed through the show. We know Robert knows what's good for him. He identifies as a Tar Heel. All right.
Lesson learned.
Oh, Andrew, like I said, I think we'll get started with key employee retention. First and foremost, let's start by defining what a key employee would be in a business.
Yeah, so we'll start with partnership. So if they're a partnership, generally speaking, you and the other owner or other owners are likely going to have your own roles and duties within the business. So you could count each of you as key people. Now, you don't necessarily have to worry about the owners leaving. So it's not as important when it comes to employee retention, but there's employee retention and there's employee protection. Right. In other words, protection is protecting the business against the loss of a key person, right? Because if you lose a key person, there's going to be a direct cost and an indirect cost. The direct cost is finding and hiring and training that person's replacement. The indirect cost is whatever loss of productivity that the business would realize in that person's absence. So a lot of times the business owner is saying, whether it be another owner or it be, an actual key person of the business, when asked, like, well, what would happen if the business lost this key person? And they'd say, well, I'd probably have to step in and, do that person's job. And it's like, okay, well, with what time? Because you're already doing your job within the business and you're very busy, and I know how busy you are. So how are you going to find time to do that job? And something's got to give. There's going to be loss of productivity in some way. So financially, the business needs to protect itself, and that's where key person protection, generally insurance is, whether it be life insurance or disability insurance or something like that. Key person retention. So defining a key person partnership aside, generally it's going to be somebody that generates revenue within the business. So it's not necessarily frontline folks. Obviously, they're generating revenue, but kind of the business would suffer if the business lost this person. So it could be like an operations manager. It might be a designer. It might be a salesperson. It might be a crew leader. It might be somebody who, if you look and said, it would be real tough for a while if this person left. That would be a key person, right? So if you're a small crew with a couple, with just a couple guys, probably you are the key person, right? And this may not be a concern. But if you're a little bit bigger, if you have, maybe a couple crews and things like that, then you arguably, I'm sure if you looked, have at least 1 or 2 people who you can identify as key people.
Absolutely. Someone who the business would probably have to press pause for a period of time while they replaced that role, that individual in that role.
Right.
Okay. So So let's talk. Let's get into how you keep the. We obviously understand those people are incredibly important. That's why they're
Sure.
identified as a key person,
Right.
right? So now, and especially now, when the economy, maybe there's a question mark here, and maybe there's a little bit of a fog looking into the future on what that looks like. So I think retention in general right now is a conversation everybody's having. What are some ways we can look at retaining these key employees? Now, let me pause here. Sean King is going to be very upset. We call them team members, like key team members.
Oh,
so.
sure. Yes. Sorry. Key
But-
team members.
Well, what steps can we take to try to retain these key team members and basically keep our company on stable ground here?
So just a quick blurb about employee retention in general.
Okay.
A lot of business owners focus on pay and compensation. They say, I'm willing to pay this much and this, that, and the other, and so on and so forth. Obviously, pay is important. Pay and benefits are important, certainly.
Of course.
But there's a lot of things that go into employee retention that isn't that, right? It could be leadership, it could be culture, it could be management, it could be the feeling of importance, feeling valued. Employees have to feel like they are our team members, have to feel like they are part of something bigger than themselves. They have to feel like they're part of a community, part of a home, part of something that that they are proud of and can do good at. And I mean, there's a lot of like intangible things that aren't just pay and compensation that go
Sure.
into that, right? And people need to see that they're part of a winning team. They need to see that I have upward mobility. Nobody wants to be in a job where they feel like I'm only ever going to do this always and forever and don't get a chance to move up and so on, right?
Sure.
So there's I mean, a dozen or two little things that aren't pay and compensation, right? So
Yeah.
Just a quick blurb about that in general.
Of course.
Then when it comes to key people, one of the biggest mistakes I see business owners make when it comes to that is the first place their mind goes is, hey, I have this person that's really important to the business. They've been with me for a long time. They're really, integral to the business. I want to give them a percentage ownership of the business to help them stick around and so they can share in the profit and so they can, and all the intention is great. Like,
Sure.
Where their mind at, where their heart is at with that is wonderful. But almost never, I won't say never, but I mean, giving an employee a percentage ownership of the business is usually the last thing you should consider.
Okay.
And most business owners go to that first because they don't know what the other options are. So
Sure.
want to discuss the other option, which generally, and there's, so speaking in generalities,
Yeah.
there's kind of three big ones, right?
Okay.
So there's synthetic equity or phantom stock. They both mean the same thing. So if you hear me say synthetic equity or phantom stock, they both mean the same thing.
Okay.
There's non-qualified deferred compensation plans, which we'll dig into, and then profit sharing, right, are kind of the three kind of big overall. Obviously, you can get real creative with different things, but those are the three of the most kind of more common ones. And they all work different ways and are meant to incentivize different things. So depending on your business, depending on this person's role within the business, and depending on what you're trying to incentivize, will determine which of those are going to be the better fit for you and the golden handcuffs for that person. All of these,
Sure.
you might hear the term golden handcuffs, right? So we want to, we want to make sure that this person is incentivized to stick around for a long period of time. And again, pay and compensation, culture, management, all that other stuff is part of that as well, obviously. And people will say, well, I give them, sometimes I give them profit share on jobs, or I give them, kind of commission on jobs, or I give them bonuses and like that. It's great in the short term, right? But that only keeps them there through that bonus, right?
Sure.
Unless they are kind of more officially tied to something. So you and I talked quite a bit. Like you said, we kind of have a show before the show. We talked quite a bit.
Yeah.
There's
Let's
about.
Sorry.
Sure. No. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so one important distinction here is kind of what the end in mind is, right? Like what the goal is. And it seems like a 10-year exit is kind of the landmark that we need to look at if you're looking at something sooner than 10 years. So, and you used an example of a company that saw the end on the horizon. There wasn't really an heir apparent. There weren't kids that were interested.
Yep.
There weren't, interested employees or team members or whatever. Yep. So they were looking at a sale, right? Just out to outside individual or company or an outside interest in less than 10 years. So that would likely look one way.
Right.
A lot of times in fencing, we tend to start with a much further horizon, right? So we've got kids, we've got siblings, we've got other people that we're looking at. Hey, over time, we're going to bring them into the fold. We'll likely do some sort of transfer in a long time, right? Like it's over 10 years. It's across that horizon.
Right.
And those decisions look different than the shorter than 10 years. We'll call them short-term and long-term, maybe exits.
Sure. Yeah. So synthetic equity, to your point, is really intended. So let's talk about what synthetic equity is. Synthetic equity is basically a deferred compensation plan. But what you're doing, the way you can structure that is, let's say you had, again, a key person within the business, and you knew that your plan is to likely sell the business within 10 years. Beyond 10 years isn't going to be, and you'll see why, but isn't going to be, this method won't be effective for incentivizing that. It generally needs to be under 10 years, under 5 certainly, but we could stretch it as far as 10. So if you knew that you were going to sell the business at some point within the next 5 to 10 years, then synthetic equity for a key employee could work. And so what it is on paper, it is a percentage of the sale price that they will get once it's sold, right? So it's not actual ownership of the business. It's an on paper thing that say only upon the sale of this business will you get a certain percentage, right? And so you can structure it to say, all right, you got this key person or key people, and they're like, all right, well, you can earn 1% synthetic equity per year up to X percent, let's say 5%. So you can earn 1% per year, and then it will cap at 5%. And then let's assume that person capped at 5%, and you built your business and you sold it at some point down the road for $1 million. Well, that person would get 5% of the sale price, which would be $50,000, right? So that incentivizes them to stick around through the sale because, and the reason that's important to you as the owner is because, again, if that person is key and crucial to the business, presumably a decent chunk of the value of the business is dependent upon that person or somebody just like that person to be in that position, right? So, if you got to that point where you're like, hey, we're getting close to selling, in the next, couple years, or let's say you're in conversations with somebody and then that key person were to leave for whatever reason, there goes whatever sale price you thought. It's just going to be less, right? You're not going to be able to get the same. So it might be worth giving up a certain percentage to make sure that person sticks through the sale. And then the example that you and I talked about prior to coming on live is, a client that has a contractor type business. And he didn't have any. So the synthetic equity can also be part of a succession plan for the business.
Okay.
Because this guy didn't have there's no heir apparents. He's got 2 young daughters. He's got no employees that would be the person he would sell it to upon his death or something like that. So again, as part of a succession plan, making sure that we have a plan for what happens to the business if something were to happen to him, because like most business owners, the majority of his wealth is in his business. So if he were to die and the business becomes much less valuable because he's not there, he wants to make sure that his family can capitalize on this thing that he's built for the last 15, 20 years, right? So we identified 3 key people, one being like an office manager person, one being kind of a crew leader type person, and then one being a designer for the type of work that he did. And he's like, I really need all 3 of those to be able to run this business. So basically we are in the process of working on his succession plan, and each of those 3 people upon his death will get 5% synthetic equity of the business. So not actual ownership, synthetic equity of the business, because upon his death, it's basically going to be put to market, and hopefully they can sell it within 6 to 12 months or whatever. But if any of those people were to leave, it's not going to be worth what it was once worth. So we need to make sure that those people stick around through the sale. And I mean, we're talking about a multi-million-dollar business. So I mean, 5% each of multiple millions of dollars is a meaningful amount for them.
It's significant. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but again, that's only for, again, to your point, if you're like, hey, we are not thinking about that anytime on the horizon. My plan is to pass it down to kids, or I have no thought of selling the business anytime soon, certainly not within 10 years, then synthetic equity would probably not be the thing for you to look at for your key employees.
Okay. Well, and so that's a great transition. So where would you start looking? So you've got a successful business, you've got key employees where, hey, if this person were to leave, we would have to press pause on that part of the business until we filled that role again. What do you start looking at? Say if it's over that 10-year horizon, where do you start looking to keep those key team members?
So, depending on the role of this person, we will either look at a profit share plan or a non-qualified deferred compensation plan. So I'll talk about the non-qualified deferred compensation plan first. And there's 2 ways to structure that. I mean, there's 2 kind of main ways to structure it, and then lots of ways to structure it within that. But the 2 main ways are a defined benefit plan or a defined contribution plan. So basically what you're doing is, again, and what you're trying to do is incentivize this person to stick around for a long period of time, let's say 20 years, all right? Just making up a number, 15, 20 years, let's say 20. Well, if it's a defined benefit plan, well, then you're creating this plan. And again, it's, you got to do all the legal documentation, like it's kind of a whole thing to get it set up, but it can be done fairly easily. Defined benefit plan is so you are defining the benefit that they get down the road. So you're not necessarily responsible for the contributions. So whether you contribute nothing or a lot, or where that money goes, or how you're doing that, doesn't matter. But this is a liability, right? This is a future liability where you're basically promising them X amount of dollars at some point in the future, right? So in other words, let's say that you structured it to be a 20-year plan, and you're saying, hey, if you stick around for the next 20 years, the business promises to give you X amount of dollars in either a lump sum or X amount of dollars per year over a certain, a 10-year period of time, or however you want to structure that. But you are promising that number down the road if that person were to stick around. So, I mean, it needs to be enough where it's meaningful, where somebody cares, and then and again, it can be unfunded, which then it's an unfunded liability, which not a lot, I mean, isn't, I don't think the thing to do, but you're promising them X amount of dollars at some point down the road. And then it's a tax write-off to the business once it's paid to them. So if you were to invest that money somewhere, it's not a tax write-off. If you were to contribute money somewhere, it's still a business asset. So if you're putting money aside for this person and this person leaves 10 years into that 20 years, well, they don't get any of that money. They're not vested in any of it, right? So they don't get any of it, and the business gets to absorb that money and keep it because it's a business asset. So that's why it's not a tax deduction in the years that you're contributing. It's only a tax deduction once it's paid to them, and then it's taxable. Right. The other way to structure that is the defined contribution plan, where you're saying, hey, same deal, let's say 20-year deal. I'm promising you in 20 years, you're going to get this money, and we're putting X amount of dollars per year aside, X amount of dollars per year, X amount in general, right? So just if we had a lump sum, or if X amount per year over the period of time, but we're going to put, let's say, $100,000 into this plan for you over the next however long. And then whatever it grows to, you will get 20 years from now if you're still here. And again, it can be paid out to you all at once or over a multi-year period of time.
Okay.
But you are on the hook for the contribution. It is a defined contribution. And then whatever it grows to, they're going to get whatever they get. So you're not on the hook for how much is there. You're on the hook for how much you're contributing to that.
Okay.
Right. Still, again, same deal. It's a business asset while, before it's paid to them. So if that person were to leave or if you were to fire them or what have you, the business recoups that money. Right.
Sure.
So it's only a tax write-off once it's paid to them. Again, that needs to be a business that has no plan to sell anytime, either ever or not anytime within the next 10 years. Yeah. That needs to be a key person that is really important and integral to the business that you really want to make sure sticks around for a long period of time.
Sure.
And you want to reward that person for that, for the contribution to the business and what they've been doing and for their loyalty and all that stuff. That needs to be something that is meaningful enough, an amount of money. If you're like, hey, I promise if you stay 20 years, we're going to give you an extra $2,000 a year. Nobody's going to care that much about that. It needs to be a meaningful amount.
So this sounds familiar. There was a construction type company, or there is a construction type company that a guy I know works in anyway. He was talking about, he was celebrating becoming vested in this company. And I was like, that's interesting. Like what? And he got like a jacket and he got all this, that said, like vested member or something like that. And I was like, what does this mean? He's like, okay, there's a pool of money and it is a big pool. And so what this company does, they take a healthy chunk of profits and puts it in every year into this big pool of money. And I didn't get into the weeds with him, but after, I think his number was 5 years. After 5 years, he vests a percentage a year into that. So, and upon his exit, whether willingly or not, he's entitled to whatever percent of whatever that pool of money is at that time.
Nice.
So, well, that is incredibly interesting. Now, it takes a chunk of money, right? Like you can't start that fund with $1,000 or something like that. But and so then my wheels got turning. I was like, oh, interesting. So one, it ties them to that goal, right? We need to grow this pool because now I'm entitled to a percentage of it. So let's make that bigger. And the company says, great. The way to make that bigger is by helping increase profits. So we can put more into that every year. They had like during their end of year dinner or whatever, they're like, we're moving this chunk into this. So you can multiply your number times that number and you know where you're at. Right. Now, what I think also makes sense is that company probably has that in an interest bearing account, right? That is then they're making their money work for them sort of thing. Yep. So anyway, this sounds like a version of what you're talking about.
Yeah, that sounds like it. And it sounds, if it's a percentage of profit, it sounds like, so a couple things. One, if we're talking about doing like a non-qualified deferred compensation plan or something like I was describing, obviously there needs to be enough profit and cash flow and stuff there to be able to do that comfortably. All right. Sure. I mean, I know that seems fairly obvious, but it makes me feel better to say it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what that guy, the business that was a maybe form of, and again, I'd have to look at the details, but it sounds like a form of a profit sharing plan, which is interesting. Or it could be
maybe like a hybrid between the two or something. Because it did have a deal where he had to be there for 5 years, but then he didn't have access to it until he left. And it was defined by a percentage. He got some percentage a year of, like I said, I didn't get too far into the weeds on it, but
did he mention if it was an employee owned company?
I don't believe they are.
Okay.
They very well could be.
Sure. It just sounds similar. It sounds similar to an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan.
Okay.
Again, without looking at the details, I'm grasping at straws, but
yeah. But maybe this is just an example of that. There are different ways to slice the pie, right? That
Yep.
we can get to end in mind. But the reason I bring it up is now this individual is very tied to the success of that company, because his success is now, or a portion of it, he still gets obviously compensated and he has bonuses and that sort of thing, but he has this overall number sitting at the top. He's like, I need to make that number bigger, right? And the longer he stays in, the higher his percentage gets.
And to your point, we all want employees who give a crap about the profitability and healthiness of the business. And that's a great way to do it, is to tie at least part of their compensation to the healthiness, the financial healthiness and or profit of the business, which kind of leads us into perfect segue into profit sharing plans, right?
Yeah,
so
you bet.
This seems like it was all orchestrated very well, but
I would love to take some sort of credit for this, but it's actually just flowing smoothly today.
Yep. So if it's a profit share, again, you can do something like you're mentioning, or that gentleman was talking about, where it is this, big plan that everybody gets to participate in if they're there for a certain period of time, all those things. Or you can do, which is wonderful for businesses that are big enough and healthy enough to be able to do that, right? Or you can do some sort of profit share plan with an employee. It doesn't have to be everybody. But you would want to make sure that the person that you are putting on some sort of profit share plan is somebody who is in charge of running at least a department or part of the business.
Sure.
Or I've seen it happen a lot where it's like, this is the person who basically the business owner is at the stage where it's like, all right, this person could probably run this thing without me, and I want to take, or largely, and I kind of want to take a step back, and I want to make this person, incentivize them to, again, give a crap about the financial healthiness of the business above and beyond their compensation. So then some sort of profit share plan where it's like, hey man, you're basically in charge of running this now, and I'm going to give you a healthy percentage of the profit. I'm going to give you percentage ownership, because number one, that complicates things. Number two, to your point, now they share in the downside and the liabilities of the business as well.
Yeah,
which a lot of employees don't necessarily want, or they might not understand fully, but they do get to share in the upside, right? So, tying part of their compensation to profit. And again, I think it needs to be somebody who is either responsible for a sizable amount of revenue to the business, and or somebody who is like in charge of something, in charge of a division, in charge of, it could be a crew leader type position, or it could be that person where it's like, I want this person to basically kind of take the business over and me take a step back.
Yeah.
But I don't want to give them ownership, but I want to give them the upside to the business.
And they have a significant metric they can follow. Right. To say, here is the metric that I am responsible for. And it can be revenue, it can be gross profit, it can be whatever. It can be widgets, right? My metric is 1,000 widgets a month. And as long as I hit my 1,000 widgets, I know that ties to this, right? Because 1,000 widgets are important to the business. Again, you can tie them to revenue and profits and that. So, but I think the distinction you're making is they need to have some sort of responsibility for a large chunk of whatever the metric is.
And so if it's widgets, I think that's a bonus. If you sell so many widgets, you get a bonus. It's not necessarily profit share.
Sure.
Revenue, I really encourage business owner clients to steer away from revenue-based bonuses or goals. Not saying it's not important. But profit is what's most important, right? So if we're caring about revenue growth at all, so we have like a landscaping client, and we were looking at, so we'll do this for all clients, but this one's just fresh in my head. And we'll get, a number of years, as many as we can, but at least 5 if we can, of all the numbers of, gross revenue, profit, expenses, all the payroll, all the stuff on down, right? And so we'll get these numbers and we'll look at trends. Right. So we'll look at obviously revenue growth throughout the years and profit as a percentage of revenue and all the stuff. Right. So we'll look at all these things. And so with him, we were noticing that he's a rather mature, successful business by any metric. He's done really well, but obviously, in your early years, the percentage of revenue goes up dramatically. But as you get more mature, it starts to kind of tail off, right? As far as he's still seeing double-digit growth, but it's just not 50, 60%. It's, 10, 20% or something like that. But so we notice this, and then we notice expenses, right? They're doing this, and so at some point, at some point they're going to meet, and so it's just useful to identify that trend and point that out and say, all right, well then either we need to decrease expenses and or increase revenue and or profitability, or some combination of those two. With him, we couldn't decrease expenses too much. It was like, all right, you're going to have to raise how much you're charging for what you're doing, and that's what anyway. So I say all that to say, if we're giving a revenue based goals, or bonuses or things like that, it's like, well, we might be growing revenue, but we might not be growing profit, or we might not be growing profit at the same percentage that we're growing revenue. So because of expenses and things like that. So I really encourage business owners to, not saying not to have any revenue based metrics or bonuses, but I really, if you can, to tie those bonuses, if it's something if it's not like widgets sold, or if it's not something like that, then tie it to profit instead of revenue. I think that's the cleanest way.
No, that makes sense. And again, so that also aligns, it brings them in line with your goals as a business owner, right? My goal as a business owner isn't to sell a ton of top line revenue. It's to grow the bottom line, right? Because that's the top line leads to the bottom line. It's a funnel, but I'm most concerned with what ends up at the bottom, right? So it aligns them maybe with that goal.
And that's a really great point. And again, another perfect segue into, I think, the point you made is perfect, because I think a lot of business owners are, try to find ways to incentivize and encourage employees, but they might struggle finding the best ways to tie those incentives to the actions that you're trying to drive. The actions and or outcomes that you're trying to drive, right? So finding ways to above and beyond like base pay and bonus, benefits and compensation. If you're looking for bonuses, or if you're looking for these other things, right? Golden handcuffs, whatever it is, what are we trying to incentivize, right? So let's identify that first, and then find compensation methods to best incentivize the actions and or outcomes that we are trying to incentivize, which isn't always easy, because again, a lot of business owners are very good at doing what they do, and through no fault of their own, I cannot build a fence. I mean, I can, but it's not going to be pretty, right? So, same deal. There's a lot of business owners that just don't know what the options are. So if you're trying to figure out options, but you're coming with like a limited pool of options that about, then you got to find somebody that can like, no. The pool is much bigger than what you think, because there's all these other options out here. Now this gives us a bigger pool to choose from, as far as finding what those options are that will most incentivize those people.
Right. Well, and lead to the outcome that you're most interested in.
Absolutely.
Which at the end of the day, one of the things you should be interested in is net profit, right? After everybody gets paid, what's left in the kitty, sort of thing.
100%.
So let's transition. So, and this is kind of what I figured would happen. We're 45 minutes into subject one, but this is obviously a big subject though. Right. And it is important to the success of a business, right? Is to keep your key team members in the seat, motivated to try to help push this whole thing forward. The other thing is, so this will be a little bit more clunky of a transition. It's not nearly as seamless as what we've been doing.
We pulled it off beautifully.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think is also relevant. So keep your key members there. Let's also protect the business, right? Let's also be smart about how we organize the business. And one of those areas is assets.
Right.
And this conversation has come up a few times in social media. You see it a lot in heavy equipment, or at least I see a lot with friends with heavy equipment construction type businesses. They keep all of their equipment, right? Personal, I don't know what you want to call it, but their dozers, their excavators, or all their heavy equipment in an equipment holding company, right? Joe's equipment is over here. Now Joe's equipment then leases that equipment to Joe's construction company. Two separate entities. And there's a few benefits to that, right? And the one everybody talks about is there's a financial benefit, right? So that's the first thing everyone talks about as well. Joe's leasing company depreciates these assets over whatever scale they're on. But then Joe's construction company that lease payment shows up directly on the profit and loss. So then it gets counted in against the profits, against the net profit. So it's almost a win-win, which then everyone gets excited about, right? So like, yes, I get to win. But what they don't talk about is there's a few caveats to this, right? So maybe we could dive into this subject a little bit deeper, and we probably need to preface this with it's different for everybody, right? And it probably varies state to state, maybe too, and we're going to get into sales tax, we're going to into things like that, but just know that this isn't like a blanket suggestion sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Big caveat being, this is, general stuff that we really cannot say. I mean, we run into some people where that makes perfect sense. It may, some people it makes a lot less sense. And so yes, I mean, I will say, and like you said, it's state to state, it's situation per situation. So do not take any of this and go run and do stuff without talking to your people first, right? So
this is not professional advice. You should consult a professional before you make decisions.
That's right.
I think that's the way people say that. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So a couple things. One, I think the financial benefit is generally overstated, and that's the one that gets most people excited. But I think a lot of people misunderstand that, or it's overstated or kind of oversold. The main benefit for that, or at least from where I'm sitting, is the asset protection / liability protection of separating those things out. So in today's world, most businesses are structured as an S corporation, or a lot of them are structured as an S corporation. It might be an LLC that chooses the S election, but either way, you're filing as an S corp. In a lot of cases, that's what businesses are doing nowadays. So we run into sometimes, so not just vehicles and equipment, but we also run into almost never does it make sense to own your real estate. So if you own your commercial property that you're running your business out of, a lot of times it's owned by the operating company, by ABC Fencing Company LLC, right, or whatever. Almost never should real estate be owned by an S corporation for all sorts of reasons that I won't bore you with, but most of the time, almost always, it makes more sense to separate that that commercial property into a separate business entity and do a lease back, do that lease back agreement, right? Yeah, the operating company pay a lease payment to that. A couple of reasons. One, longer term, if you ever plan to sell the business, this, that, and the other, most business buyers, or a lot of them, generally just want to buy the business. They don't want to buy the real estate. So if you own the real estate in a separate business entity, they'll buy the business from you, and then they'll continue to pay you a lease payment on the property that you own. So that's a win-win, certainly. Nice. And then if you didn't want to keep it, you could go sell it to somebody else or whatever, or continue to keep it and generate that income. In the shorter term, though, with the building, if somebody were to get slip and fall or whatever, get hurt on your property, generally speaking, they can sue the owner of the business or of the building, which is ABC Realty Company LLC, right? Not ABC Fencing Company LLC. Okay. So generally speaking, it's that asset protection, liability protection that's most important. But yes, so operating company will have to pay a lease payment to realty company, which depending on your state and so on and so forth, there might be a sales tax on the lease. Now for your building, I will say almost always separate that out.
Okay.
Don't have it owned by your operating company. When it comes to vehicles and equipment, that's very much an it depends thing, right?
Okay.
So if you're a smaller business, smaller/newer business, and it's you and not a lot of equipment, maybe 1 or 2 trucks or whatever it is, at least have it in the operating company's name. I see a lot of business owners out there who own the vehicles and equipment in their personal name, or at least some of them,
Sure.
and use it for business purposes. So you were telling me a story that I think this would be a good point for you to tell the story of why that's important.
Yeah, so this is like a friend of a friend scenario, right? So this had happened fairly recently. I was talking to a buddy about somebody. Actually, it was one of his clients anyway. It was like a microbrewery where the equipment, the upfront cost is very expensive. But I don't know microbrewery, but there's like stainless tanks, there's fermenting things. There's a lot that goes into this. So he had just created the company. He was taking his personal vehicle, pulling a personal trailer to go pick up the business equipment. So, XYZ Brewing paid for, whatever, $500,000, whatever, for this equipment, but it was pulled by business owner's truck and trailer. So then they got in a wreck on the way back, and it was somebody crossed the median, smashed into the truck, total loss. Thankfully, they were okay, right? That's the silver lining here. But so obviously it was a personal vehicle that crashed into him. Their insurance tops out at a certain level, right? His insurance would not cover the business equipment that was being towed, the vats or whatever it was. He lost all of that because it was a personal vehicle, and his personal insurance was like, why? You aren't being paid by the business to transport this. The business wasn't covering any of the cost of this transportation, right? So that's not these are two separate entities, right? You had a business thing, and then you had the personal. Well, he didn't have business insurance set up because this was a founding idea, right? This is an infancy. So what that reminds me of is an owner-operator that started, most ways he start is nights and weekends, on the side, personal vehicle, personal trailer, but it's a business endeavor, right? So you're doing this for money. You're getting paid. It's a commercial endeavor. So then you get a little success. You maybe get a dingo or a bobcat or a business piece of equipment on a personal vehicle. God forbid something happens. And in this example, this was no fault of his own. Someone else crossed him. It was their fault, but this all gets tangled up. It all gets very murky. And at the end, this guy, real world scenario, lost all of that. So now that whole business dream gets put on the shelf while he goes back and has to go back into the market, work for someone for a while to then be able to chase it again.
Yeah, what a mess, man. So at least having vehicles and equipment owned by the operating company, not in your personal name, is kind of a standard 101. Make sure to have that done. Beyond that, it might make sense, again, depending on all sorts of factors, size of the business and all the stuff. If you have vehicles and equipment, sometimes it makes sense to create a business entity to hold vehicles and equipment and lease it back. Sometimes it makes sense to hold vehicle leasing and equipment leasing company and have both that's doing a lease back, right?
Okay.
Right. Again, same things apply that, depending on state and all the stuff, you'll probably pay a sales tax on the lease. So if you ask an attorney if you should separate those things out, their answer is almost going to be yes, because they are really just looking at it through the liability lens. If you ask your CPA is likely going to tell you, no, just up your insurance or just do this or that. And they're both right. Is the hard part for the business owners who are like, I don't know who to.
Yeah. And part of the accountant's argument is going to be, or not argument, but this one of their points is going to be, there is a cost associated with maintaining all these separate entities. There's separate filings, there's separate, they have to be, depending on the type of organization, maybe there's certain filings that have to be done. There's certainly separate tax filings that have to be done for each one. we're talking about sales tax, right? So company one has to pay sales tax on the lease. Well, company two has to report that sales tax to the government. There's some administration costs that go into maintaining all of these.
Yep.
Andrew, there's a comment here, and I think it dovetails nicely into what you're saying. So if you have an LLC that owns the shop, so a real estate holding company, as you diversify, should you start another LLC for a rental house, or is it okay for the rentals under one umbrella?
No. So if one is used for commercial purposes, generally speaking, almost always you would want to have, if you have a rental property, have it owned by a separate business entity. Now, I will say too, again, argument on when it comes to like rental properties and stuff like that, having it owned by an LLC or having what's called an umbrella, a personal umbrella insurance policy, right? So with an LLC, the thought is, again, the LLC owns this thing, not me. So this protects it from, if somebody were to get hurt on the property and sue me, then they can sue the owner of the property, which is LLC, not me, and that should be protected. So like you and I were talking about before the show, a lot of people assume, all right, LLC owns this thing, and by doing that, I've created this shield and I'm protected. But if not done correctly, so a lot of people end up like commingling funds, or it's just not handled correctly. And if that's the case, like having the LLC is step number one. Step number two is doing it correctly, right? So if you're not handling it correctly, then any attorney fresh out of law school will be able to prove to a judge, there's no financial difference between this business entity and this person. They have to be treated as the same. And then you might as well not have the LLC.
And you've gone through all of that for nothing.
Exactly. You paid all the costs and all the stuff, and it did nothing. Or you can have a personal umbrella insurance policy, which is super cheap. Whoever you get your home and auto through, you can call them and get it through them. Super cheap. You can get, they're usually sold in increments of $1 million, and you generally should have it have enough coverage to at least equal or maybe slightly exceed your net worth, right? So if you have a $1.5 million net worth, let's say, then get a $2 million umbrella policy. It'll probably be less than $1,000 a year, right? I mean, they're really cheap, or somewhere right around there, depending on all sorts of factors. But that does the same thing. Somebody sue you above and beyond what your normal insurance would pay as far as liability protection. That covers, if you had a $2 million policy, that covers you for another $2 million above that. And so real quick story about that. At the beginning of last year, we had a client. So I personally believe a lot of people, let's say most people, should consider having a personal umbrella insurance policy. They're super cheap. It's worth having. People are so sue happy nowadays, all the stuff. So we recommend to a lot of clients to consider having it, to call their property casualty insurance person and to, look at quotes and let's look at getting something. So we had this client at the beginning of last year, told him, hey, you should get this. Anyways, time goes by, a little bit of time goes by. He ends up reaching out to me. He said, hey, who's the best attorney you know? And I said, well, for what? And he's like, I just got in a car wreck. He's literally on the side of the road after this car wreck. Like, it just happened. He's like, I just got in a car wreck. Police are asking me questions. I told them I want an attorney present. Because he ended up killing the lady that he got in a car wreck with.
Oh,
not great.
Right.
And it was an accident. It was no, it wasn't drinking. He wasn't none of that kind of stuff. It just happened. So I said, here's an attorney that can help you with that. And I immediately asked one of my team members, I said, can you pull up his file to see if he got that umbrella policy we've told him to get? And she came back after a few minutes and she said, well, I see on 3 separate occasions we reminded him to get it. And after each meeting, we send a recap email. Here's what we talked about. Here's any action items. Here's any information we need. And every email after the meeting, we reminded him to get it, gave him contact information for somebody who could help him to get it, all the stuff. And she's like, I don't see confirmation where he got it, so I don't know. And so I asked him, he didn't know. Come to find out, he didn't get it. And he's in the middle of a lawsuit right now. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. But probably not great. He makes over 7 figures a year. Right? I mean, he makes great income. Anyway, so point is, most people, regardless of all the LLC stuff, whatever, I would encourage you, call your home and auto person, consider getting an umbrella policy. They're super cheap. The juice is worth the squeeze, but
Sure.
that helps with a lot of the personal liability stuff, not necessarily the business. But the tax thing, to your point, is you create this LLC. This LLC is purchasing the equipment or vehicles. Yeah, you get to depreciate those and write those off. And then if this business is paying a lease payment to the LLC that owns that, well, then the operating company gets to write off that lease, right?
Yep.
However, the LLC that owns that property has to see that, has to realize that lease payment as income. That again, you can write down due to the depreciation. So it might be at least somewhat a wash depending on the situation.
Sure.
But if you own the equipment in the operating company, you'd get to write off the same thing anyways. You know what I mean? So it's not
there's not a massive financial gain by doing that. It's
right.
Usually, like you said, hopefully net zero, because one important part is you have to lease it at fair market value.
Exactly right. Thank you for bringing that up. Yep. Yeah, you can't just pay $1 lease payment or something. You gotta do fair market value or something very close. And I'll take it just one step further, and I won't talk a lot about it. But if we're talking about these separate business entities, your operating company, and then some of these other business entities, a lot of times people will just own these business entities themselves. Sometimes it might make sense to have a holding company or an asset protection trust where you own this thing owns these things, right? Yep. So this is kind of that extra layer between you and these business entities, you personally, between you and those personal business entities. So, a lot of people that everybody has, for the most part, wealthier people in their town that people know the name of in their town.
Yep.
And I think people would be surprised how many of those people, if they have good planning, on paper, don't really own anything.
Yeah.
They own very little. Yep. Right? They control a lot of things, but they personally own very little. Things are owned by trusts or business entities or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. They own stock of the holding company, or they don't own the thing. I'll share some personal experience on this rental, Corey. So our thought, and this is one person's thought, but so we have rentals, and I say we, so I have rental properties in a completely separate, and here's the important part. So you talk about funds commingling, separate bank accounts, separate filings, separate everything. Because I always view worst case scenario, right? God forbid somebody has somebody over at one of the rental houses, they slip it. It's wintertime, right? So now technically they're responsible. You can set up all these protections. They're responsible for the snow and ice removal or whatever. Okay. Somebody slips and falls. Well, then they're going to say, wait a minute, who owns this house? Oh, he does. Well, isn't that the guy that also does this? Interesting. Well, and so then they go find a lawyer friend, right? And that says, well, hey, yeah, I know this big name, and I don't know. Let's look at it. Let's open things up a little bit and see. What I'm hoping they find is, okay, house is owned by LLC. That's a property completely separate from me. And unfortunately, wouldn't you know, that house has a loan against it, so there's not actually liquid funds available. What you want is a lawyer to open up the books and go, there's nothing here. Like, we can't, and everything is separate, right? There's a veil here between rental property and everything else I do, so that they can't get across easily.
I'm going to get into the weeds for just a second, and this is probably more complex than I'm just going to hit on it, because it's probably more complex than what's needed. So there's ways to set that up where there's some anonymity, right? Where it's basically unsearchable, not unsearchable, but people would never tie it back to you. Because yes, that is part of that. If they're like, oh, doesn't this guy own a successful business? Right? And this guy does pretty well, I say, and so now the better you do, the bigger the target is on your back as far as attorneys are concerned, right? So there's ways to set that up where it's kind of anonymous, right? Where people can't necessarily tie that back to you. And to your point about, even if you had a paid off piece of property in LLC, a rental property or whatever it is, and it's paid off and it's worth $500,000 or $1 million or whatever. right? To your point, that's equity in that is exposed to that potential risk. You can do what's called equity stripping. And now this is only for, again, when it makes sense, but you create this other entity that holds a line of credit on this, to where if it's $1 million equity, this entity holds the line of credit of $1 million on this. So again, there's no equity in this. This business entity that has nothing to do with this holds the line of credit. So there's no equity here to get. And now, yes, this business entity, you would have to pay the interest or the payment or whatever to this.
Yeah.
But again, that's another, form of, it's called equity.
Yeah. It's
right?
another
So
layer of protection, right? Because
right.
if nothing else, everyone gets, it seems like our world becomes more litigious over time, right? Like, hey, how can I get at this? And my mind also goes to the same thing when we're talking about work trucks, right? So we're talking about separate holding companies for assets, for equipment. Our trucks are wrapped. They are big, shiny targets and we run a successful company. So there could be some unscrupulous person out there that says, well, they look successful. I wonder if we could arrange an accident that now gives me access into that. Oh, pain and suffering, and I'm so hurt, and I've got loss of wages. If these are in a separate entity, that entity will protect itself, right? But it doesn't affect the day-to-day of your main operating business. Would that be more or less?
Yeah, no, you're right. And this is probably a different topic for a different day, but
sure.
Same thing about one of the things we talk to business owners about is cash on the balance sheet, right? So we hope it's a problem where we have a lot of cash, right? Within the business. But if you are holding a lot of cash within the business, same deal, is that's exposed to the liabilities of the business. So I mean, obviously you want to have what you need to have in there. First of all. Second of all, you want that money to be getting as much return as it can, but still be safe and accessible and all the things. Because if you have, hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting there, you don't want it to be completely lazy. You want it to be getting some sort of meaningful return, but still be safe and accessible. But up to a certain point, you don't want to have too much cash within the business. You want to get that cash out of the business, either reinvest it back into the business in some way, and I say spend it, but wisely reinvest back into the business in a way that will increase profitability and or value of the business, or get it out of the business in some way, whether that be to invest in real estate or invest in whatever else you want, right? But to do something other than to get it off the books, so to speak. Yeah,
because it turns into a target, right? That's the thing. If, like I said, God forbid something happens and a lawyer opens up the books and starts looking around and says, I wonder what's in here that we can try to lay access to try to compensate for whatever. The ideal scenario is they look it up, they open the books, they go, there's nothing here. These guys are leveraged to the hill. There's a maybe 10 grand, but by the time we have cord and we have this, close the books, it's not even worth it. Let's move on. Is like the dream scenario. Well, I mean, the dream is it doesn't happen, but should it happen, that is the dream scenario. Yep. Agreed. Well, we didn't even we're at an hour 9 and we didn't even get to organization, which is a huge subject, but maybe this is okay. We're going to start feeling like a real show here when we say, Andrew, I'm going to have you back, because we're going to have to talk about this is a teaser. We're going to talk about the organization structures later. I like that. This is starting to feel like it's legit. Okay, we're doing stuff here. All right. Well, let's say hi to Chris real quick. What's up, Chris Steele? What's up, gentlemen? Hello, Chris Steele. And Fence Armor's with us, Al Martins. Hello, Al. So glad you guys joined us. You're joining us at the tail end. Please go back and watch from the beginning. It's an hour long. I know, but there's a bunch of juicy content here and also if you stick around for a few weeks, I'm sure Mark is already like planning how to slice and dice this up to create some short content, because there's some really good stuff here. There really is. These are things that you don't typically think about if you're successful, because you're focused on the mission, which is growing the company, becoming successful, whatever the mission is, you're focused there, but you really need to press pause and think about all these different moving parts to make sure, what you're driving, that you can keep that safe, right? You can keep your key people in place so that this machine keeps churning, that you can keep growing and you can keep building on that. But you also want to make sure it's organized correctly, that way something doesn't happen, that maybe put that in jeopardy.
You have to make time. And I know it's really hard. And I hear people say it's hard to find time. Or if you're trying to find time, you're never going to find it, but you can make time. We can all make time for things that are important to us. So you have to make time to work on your business. I know it's a kind of a cliche thing to work on your business, not in your business, but you have to make time to sit down and with either another professional or with a mentor or with yourself or whatever, but you have to make time to work on these things. And I tell people all the time, like, I hope everybody listening who's a business owner has a CPA. Why do we hire a CPA? It's not like we can't learn the tax code. It's all out there. It's not a secret. It's all out there. We could all learn it. Is that the most efficient use of your time? And so learning it, and it's always changing, right? So is it more efficient to pay this CPA who is hopefully keeping up with the changes and understands the tax code, who can, deliver it to you in a way that, you know what I'm saying, to kind of do it for you? Same thing with, hiring people like Tony Thornton or the Mr. Fence Academy folks or something. I mean, all that, you have to work on yourself as a leader, and you have to work on the business, on these things that aren't sexy. They aren't necessarily money making, or they're not fun, and it's not, but you got to do it if you want to get to the next level.
Yeah, that's the thing is you got to sit and think about, hey, if I had a meeting right now that would take 2 hours, but if I didn't take it, it would shut this business down. Would I take it? Yep. I would press pause on whatever else was going on, and I would focus on this meeting, right? And you really got to kind of put things in that type of perspective.
And I think it's like training an employee. It's like, okay, if you were to train an employee, you're going to have to spend time, dedicated time with that person, training them on the job that you want them to do. The more time, the more dedicated time that you can spend with them, and the better job that you're able to do on training them. Yes, that's an investment that you could have been doing other things.
Sure.
But you train them up, you get them ready, and now they can be a productive employee for you versus, hey, I'm hiring you, you're doing this job, figure it out, and they're never going to be good at it, or it's going to take them a long time, and there's a lot of productivity lost because you didn't take the time to do that, right? So same deal with your business. If you don't take time to, really focus on the things you need to do to train this employee well, it's never going to be a good employee. Right? Your business is never going to reach the level that you want it to reach because it doesn't, you know what I mean? You can't figure the things out. So you got to spend time doing it.
Well, and that's the thing is, as business owners, we can always find things to be busy with. That's the thing. There's always any of 100 things that we could be really busy with. I think probably the problem, and it's something I struggle with, I'm sure everyone does, is prioritizing everything correctly, right? Just say, hey, these 10 things need my attention today. Now, priority one is and I think it's just realizing that the priority of the business organization, the business management, needs to take precedent over kind of the day-to-day things, because really what you're doing is you're providing like safety stops, right? So should something happen, we can revert back to this safety stop and then we can move forward, rather than, worst case scenario, if somebody isn't organized, and we didn't even get to this part, but it isn't organized correctly, everything's in one pot, their property, their business, their trucks, something happens. Well, now your focus is on this because you have no other, this is the biggest thing to your company, or you can build kind of stopgaps into here.
Right. Absolutely.
Andrew, if someone wanted to reach out to you directly to learn more about these subjects or subjects related to this, how do they find you?
Yeah, they can go to our website, which is just atlasfinancialstrategies.com. We do quarterly business owner workshops that are meant to kind of deep dive into various subjects. So we'll do one later this month that is focused on knowing your numbers. So profitability, and difference between margin to markup, and on your true expenses and how to charge and all the things. Fantastic. Next quarter will be taxes, but largely focused on taxes and things like that, and so on and so forth. But we do those. So, I mean, you can, if you get on our website, obviously you can contact us. You can also sign up for our newsletter. And so that's basically our email list. And in those emails, you will get the invitations to these free quarterly business owner workshops. So you can sign up, you'll get the invitations. They're all Zoom webinar. You can do that there.
Okay.
I have a relatively new YouTube page. We only have maybe a dozen, 15, 20 videos or something on there right now. Like, follow, subscribe.
Of course.
Right, is what
Of
you
course.
got.
Of course.
But there's, we're always trying to put content out there that we hope people find valuable as well. So, feel free to get on there and watch some of the videos.
Yeah, guys, just in talking with Andrew offline, and there's a wealth of knowledge here and a wealth of information. I think anyone would find a benefit in reaching out and learning more. Obviously, so we're going to throw up the YouTube channel. I'm a big fan of it, quite obviously. Click over, like, subscribe, so for more great content. Andrew, I appreciate you being so gracious with your time.
Thank you. And one more thing is, especially for the fence guys, the fence industry has been gracious enough to embrace me with open arms, and what wonderful guys that I've gotten to meet, through the process. But for the fence guys, again, if you ever want to call, if you have things, so sometimes it's not, maybe hiring us doesn't make sense, right? But you got this thing where it's like, I need somebody's help with this. And and there's been multiple people throughout the last year or so that, just a quick, 15, 20, maybe 30-minute phone call about an issue that they, have, that they just need maybe somebody like mine's input on, or advice, or maybe a second set of eyes, or whatever.
Sure.
I'm happy to take those phone calls. We don't charge for them, any of that. So you can just reach out to the office and say, hey, just let me schedule, a quick phone call with Andrew. Or you can reach out to me even on my personal Facebook or something and say, hey man, I got this thing. Do you got time for a quick phone call? So I do my best to make myself available for the fence guys.
Yeah.
And so if you need anything, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to take phone calls, help you as best I can. Again, not everybody needs to hire us, but maybe you just need some quick help.
Yeah, well, and I saw you reaching out to the industry in the industry groups, right, in the Facebook pages, saying, "Hey, technically our office is closed, but I'd like to be able to help you guys. I have some availability." Yep. So that's huge. I mean, just being a resource we're helping the industry get better, right? And rising tide raises all the ships. If we can help each other, then we're all stronger and better for it.
That's right.
Very good. Andrew, we're going to have to schedule episode 3 here, because we've got at least one more thing on the list. And I bet when we put our heads together, we'll come up with a couple more.
I don't doubt it.
Again, thank you so much. I know Saturdays are tough. Thank you for making time available for the show.
Thanks for having me on, Joe.
Guys, reach out to Andrew. Go like and subscribe to his YouTube channel. When we get off of here, I'm going to go like and subscribe, because I can't wait to see what kind of content he puts out. Next week's guest, we'll be talking about the Pickets and Picks event coming up at FinceTech in Nashville. I think we're like 3 weeks away. It's going to be here before you know it. So going to have Robert and Chance on to talk about Pickets and Picks. You're not going to want to miss it. For now, Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors, and I'll see you next time.